The 1960s were an explosive, endlessly intriguing decade for music, thanks in large part to one man. I'm not talking about Elvis, Jimi Hendrix, or the Beatles, but instead a sitar player from India. Ravi Shankar would end up changing the course of Western music. He was a catalyst for the psychedelic revolution and inspired a new genre of rock. So why did he regret it? Ravi Shankar was born in India in 1920. From an early age, he was part of a dance group alongside his brother Uday Shankar. They toured Europe and America, dancing for and educating audiences. Eventually, at age 18, he quit touring to study sitar. After 6 rigorous years of training, Ravi moved to Mumbai and composed for the Indian People's Theatre Association. Shankar was invited into the Soviet Union in 1954 as part of a cultural delegation. 1 year later, he was invited to perform a demonstration in New York City. Ravi resigned from his post at All India Radio and focused on touring the UK, Germany, and the US. Keep in mind, this was 1956, when the biggest song on the radio in the States was Heartbreak Hotel by Elvis.
Keep flowing,
the era of rock experimentation and the foreign wave were still only on the horizon. It was around this time that Ravi befriended the founder of World Pacific Records, Richard Bach, and recorded albums on his label, the first of which being 3 Ragas in 1956. For the most part, though, Ravi was playing for smaller audiences. It wasn't until the 60s that artists began to take note of Ravi's sound, and the assimilation didn't start with the Beatles or any rock group. It actually gained traction with a jazz artist, John Coltrane to be exact. On his 1961 album, Africa Brass, Coltrane replicated the sound of the tabla, an Indian drum played with your palms and fingers. It was a key component to Ravi's instrumental lineup. To accomplish this, Coltrane hired 2 bass players to mirror the sound. He once told a journalist, "His music moves me. I'm certain that if I recorded with him, I'd increase my possibilities tenfold." John never did get to record with Ravi, though he did name his second son after him. And now we reach a turning point for Ravi's sitar music in the West, 1965. The Byrds recorded at the same studio as Shankar, and when member David Crosby got to see Ravi live, he was a vocal proponent of his music. The Byrds' advocacy for Ravi would soon reach the ears of Beatles member George Harrison. George was immediately taken with the sounds of the sitar. While recording a new Beatles song, Norwegian Wood, George would make an impulse decision to add an improvised sitar layer onto the track. This would be the first known rock song to utilize a sitar. This track, along with numbers by the Yardbirds and the Kinks, would jumpstart a sitar wave that took over the West. The next year, 1966, was an explosive time for this music, now coined as Raga Rock. Hundreds of pop and rock songs would be influenced by Ravi.
And cure his heart.
Ravi became an icon for this growing psychedelic rock movement, and bolstered up by his friendship with George Harrison, he became the world's most famous Indian musician of the 60s. In 1967, he opened up a Western branch of the Kanara School of Music in LA. Robbie Krieger, the guitarist for The Doors, studied music here and fell in love with the sound, employing it on songs like The End and Indian Summer.
Indian Summer.
In 1967, the sitar fad was taken to new heights when guitar company Dan Electro introduced the choral electric sitar, an instrument that made it easier than ever for guitarists to tap into that exotic Indian sound. Ravi's influence and the Raga Rock genre had many unique characteristics outside of using the sitar. Notable attributes were a drone element, traditionally provided by the tambura or harmonium, use of Indian scales, lyrical themes related to mysticism, and the use of repetitive phrasings. There were definitely other elements at play during this time, specifically in California, where the drug lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD, was exploding, and it wasn't going to be illegal for another 2 years. The psychedelic properties of acid made this foreign instrument more alluring. Hippies were infatuated not just with the sitar and Indian music, but Eastern culture and religious spirituality. Many associated the meditative and spiritual nature of Indian classical music with the euphoria and surreal effects of psychedelics. Drugs played a major role in the rise of Raga Rock, and Ravi was burdened with its connection to the sitar. Ravi's first sign of hesitation regarding the fashionable use of the sitar in Western music actually coincided with the first use of the sitar in Western music, Norwegian Wood by the Beatles. The last-minute improvisational manner of using the sitar is one that's faced some criticism. In a 1966 issue of Crawdaddy, critic Sandy Pearlman said, "If used only in the interest of exoticism, it can quickly become not particularly justifiable. Since the sitar simply echoes Lennon's guitar melody, its presence conveys gimmicky Orientalism and not much else." Ravi himself seemed to be shocked to hear his native instrument being used in popular music, and also being played incorrectly. "I couldn't believe it. It sounded so strange. Just imagine some Indian villager trying to play the violin when you know what it should sound like." Even Harrison himself admitted that the sitar on the song was very rudimentary. "I didn't know how to tune it properly, and it was a very cheap sitar to begin with." This example is indicative of the criticism with a lot of Raga Rock.
Well, I'm afraid that this sudden interest that there seems to be now might go away as suddenly. But on the other hand, it will make me very happy if I see that some people take true interest and learn properly.
It's worth noting that one of the only people to fully embody the culture and meaning behind Indian classical music was actually George Harrison. After Norwegian Wood came out, his admiration with Indian culture didn't stop, but instead triggered him to immerse himself in Indian music and philosophy. Shankar was taken aback by Harrison's devotion to the instrument and realized it wasn't just a fashion for the Beatles member. In 1968, Harrison went to India to take lessons from Shankar. It was this lifelong friendship that was the catalyst for the success of Raga Rock and Indian influence on the West. However, the clash between Ravi's world and that of the West persisted. Ravi recounts being horrified after playing a successful set at Monterey Pop Festival in 1967, when Jimi Hendrix set fire to his guitar. "That was too much for me. In our culture, we have such respect for musical instruments. They are like part of God." In another concert, after Ravi and his group finished tuning up, the crowd of rock fans broke into applause. Shankar responded, "If you like our tuning, I hope you will enjoy the playing more." Ravi's relationship with hippie culture came to a boiling point at the famous 1969 Woodstock Festival, a performance that became one of his greatest regrets, calling it a terrifying experience. Ravi likened the audience to water buffaloes in India, submerged in mud. Playing for a mass audience of tripping hippies seemed to be the final straw for Ravi. After Woodstock, he wouldn't return to the US for over a year and a half, distancing himself from the whole Raga Rock movement. It makes me feel rather hurt when I see the association of drugs with our music. People would come to my concerts stoned, and they would sit in the audience drinking Coke and making out with their girlfriends. I found it very humiliating, and there were many times I picked up my sitar and walked away. It was a terrible experience at the time.
That people often think that there must be an intimate connection between Indian music and drugs, maybe because of the bizarre sound, and to play that way, or to appreciate it at least.
I don't think Ravi was prepared to enter the sphere of Western popular culture, especially in the context of the drug scene at the time. Already, Ravi was decades older than this counterculture generation. He had committed the first part of his life to mastering his instrument, making a name for himself in the classical community, and then sought to educate the world on these sounds. His world was not one of sex, drugs, or rock and roll. By the 70s, use of the sitar in popular music had decreased, but the spirit of Raga Rock continued well into the 70s and beyond. It's been an integral evolution for modern psychedelic rock, with artists like Animal Collective, Khruangbin, MGMT, King Gizzard, and Spangle. All artists who, whether they even know it or not, adopt many of the same characteristics established in Raga Rock. Although he did have regrets, Ravi was still proud of what he managed to accomplish during this time. After all, he helped to forever alter the course of Western music.